24 hours before my sister was supposed to walk down the aisle at an exclusive Newport estate, my phone lit up with a text that would ultimately destroy her life. She told me I was officially banned from her wedding because I did not fit her upper-class aesthetic. She wanted only real family there. What she did not know was that the luxury venue, the imported flowers, and the custom dress she was wearing were all paid for by the exact same sister she was trying to hide. So I did what any responsible sister would do. I let every single one of her bills bounce. I am Sienna, 33 years old, and I have spent my entire adult life quietly funding the delusions of my family. I work as an executive director at a private equity firm in Manhattan. It is a demanding job that requires cold logic and a total lack of sentimentality. Unfortunately, my mother and my younger sister Giselle mistook my quiet financial support for weakness. I was sitting in my corner office reviewing a quarterly asset report when Giselle sent the message. I remember the exact wording because it was breathtakingly arrogant. She wrote, "Sienna, I am finalizing the seating chart and I decided it is best if you do not come tomorrow. Andre and his family are prominent people. My aesthetic for this wedding is high society. Having my single corporate drone sister there ruins the vibe. Plus, I only want real family standing by my side. Please do not show up and embarrass me." I read the words twice. I did not cry. I did not throw my phone. Years of dealing with high-stakes corporate negotiations trained me to detach emotion from conflict. Instead of getting angry, I felt a profound sense of clarity. Giselle was 26 years old, an aspiring influencer who never held a real job. She was marrying Andre Jackson, a successful corporate lawyer from a highly respected African-American family. Giselle spent the last 2 years convincing Andre she came from old money, completely hiding the fact that her luxurious lifestyle was subsidized by me. I placed my coffee cup down on my desk and typed my reply. I kept it brief. I wrote, "Understood. I will not be there. Good luck with the $250,000 final venue payment due tomorrow morning. I hope your real family has a lot of liquid cash." Before I tell you how my sister and my mother reacted to that reality check, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit the like button and subscribe to the channel if you have ever had to cut off toxic family members who mistook your generosity for obligation. Trust me, you will want to hear exactly how this spectacular wedding unraveled. To understand the sheer audacity of her text, you have to understand our financial arrangement. 5 years ago, after receiving my first major partnership bonus, I made the mistake of trying to buy my family's love. I set up a blind trust managed by my firm. This trust paid the mortgage on my mother's house and covered the balance on several credit cards I allowed my mother and Giselle to use. I simply wanted them to be comfortable. But over time, they believed the money was magically theirs. My mother Beatrice convinced Giselle they were inherently wealthy, and my career was just a boring choice. When Giselle got engaged to Andre, she went completely wild. She demanded the Newport estate an open bar with top-tier champagne and a custom dress costing more than a luxury car. She handed the invoices to my mother, who forwarded them to my wealth management firm. My firm paid the initial deposits from my accounts to secure the vendors. I approved the transactions thinking it might finally earn their respect. Instead, it only fueled their arrogance. Giselle walked around telling Andre that her mother was paying for the entire wedding as a traditional gift. I was just the awkward older sister. When Giselle hit send on that message banning me from the event I was secretly financing, she handed me the perfect opportunity to close the bank. She wanted an upper-class aesthetic without the corporate drone who funded it. I was more than happy to oblige. I watched the delivery receipt on my phone turn to read. I knew she was staring at the screen, thinking my warning about the venue bill was a desperate bluff. She thought I was powerless, and the deposits were locked in. She was about to learn a very expensive lesson about chargebacks, and what happens when the invisible hand feeding you finally snaps shut. My phone screen went dark for 3 seconds before lighting up again. It was my mother Beatrice. I let it ring twice before answering, leaning back in my leather chair. I did not even get a chance to say hello before her sharp laughter filled the speaker. She was laughing so hard she had to catch her breath. Sienna, you are pathetic, she gasped. I just saw the text you sent your sister. A $250,000 venue bill. Are you trying to scare her with imaginary numbers now? You have always been jealous of Giselle. But this is a new low, even for you. I kept my voice completely flat. There is nothing imaginary about $250,000, mother. That is the final balance required by the estate before they unlock the doors tomorrow morning. I strongly suggest you figure out how to pay it. Beatrice scoffed loudly. You are delusional. You sit in that depressing corporate office all day cut off from reality. You are 33 years old, single and bitter. Giselle is 26, radiant, and marrying into one of the most prominent families in the city. Do you honestly think Andre Jackson is struggling to pay for his own wedding? His family has real money, not your little paycheck. Andre handled the venue, he handled the caterer, he handled the flowers. You are completely irrelevant here. I listened to her rewrite history. She spent the last 2 years submitting every single wedding invoice directly to my wealth management firm. I personally approved wire transfers for the deposit on the Newport estate, the $50,000 custom floral arrangements, and the open bar. In her mind, she convinced herself Andre was paying for it all to maintain the illusion of their high society status. You told Andre he was paying for this, I asked, genuinely curious how deep her web of lies went. I did not tell him anything. Because it is none of your business. Beatrice snapped, her tone shifting to vicious. We let you pay for a few small things early on because you insisted. You wanted to feel included. But the Jackson family took care of the heavy lifting. You are just trying to ruin her perfect weekend because you know you will never have a wedding of your own. You are a bitter spinster who only cares about spreadsheets. The sheer audacity of her statement was almost impressive. Those few small things amounted to over $400,000 in deposits over the last 14 months. I fully funded the illusion she was selling to the Jackson family. Now she was actively discarding me because she believed the trap was set. She thought Andre was locked in, the wedding was guaranteed, and my usefulness had expired. I am not trying to ruin anything, I replied calmly. Giselle made it clear she only wants real family there. I am simply honoring her request. I will not attend. Since I am no longer part of the aesthetic, I am no longer part of the budget. Beatrice let out another sharp laugh. Budget? What budget? We do not need your money, Sienna. We never needed your money. Do us all a favor and stay in Manhattan. The sight of you moping around in a cheap suit would only embarrass us in front of Andre's parents. Do not call us again until you apologize for your jealousy. She hung up the phone. The line went dead. There was no hesitation, no guilt, no momentary realization of what she had just done. She truly believed that she had won. She believed her golden child was immune to consequences, and that I was just a bitter woman, making empty threats. I sat in the quiet of my office, letting her final words sink in. We never needed your money. It was the most liberating sentence she had ever spoken to me. For years, I carried the suffocating weight of their financial survival on my shoulders. I paid their mortgages, their credit card bills, their luxury vacations out of duty. I thought if I provided enough, they would eventually love me. Instead, they grew to despise the hand that fed them. They hated me because my success highlighted their failures. They wanted the lifestyle my money provided, but they wanted to erase me. Beatrice had just given me permission to do exactly what I should have done 5 years ago. She confidently claimed they did not need my money. It was finally time to put that theory to the test. I turned back to my computer screens, closed the quarterly asset report, and opened the secure portal to my wealth management accounts. The time for issuing polite warnings was completely and officially over. I pulled my laptop closer and watched the secure portal for my wealth management firm load on the screen. For the past 5 years, I rarely looked at the granular details of the family trust. I simply deposited my massive annual bonuses and let my portfolio manager handle the distribution. I did not want to see the itemized receipts of their endless greed. I only wanted to know they were financially safe. But today, sitting in my quiet Manhattan office after being banished from a wedding I was secretly funding, I wanted to see every single penny. I picked up my phone and dialed the direct line to my wealth manager, Thomas. He answered on the first ring. I bypassed the usual corporate pleasantries. Thomas, I need you to initiate a total freeze on the secondary accounts linked to my master portfolio. Yes, all of them. Effective immediately. Thomas paused. He had managed my finances long enough to know the volatile nature of my family and the vast amounts of money they burned through. He pulled up my file. Sienna, just to be absolutely clear, you are asking me to sever the authorized user status for Beatrice and Giselle. This will instantly deactivate their credit cards, freeze their checking access, and halt the automatic bank drafts for your mother's mortgage. I stared at the screen, watching the cursor blink. That is exactly what I am asking. They are no longer authorized to use my money. They called me a bitter corporate drone, yet they have survived solely on the wealth I produced. It stops today. Let me tell you what it feels like to sever a financial umbilical cord you have maintained for half a decade. It does not feel chaotic. It feels incredibly peaceful. As Thomas read off the list of active accounts, the reality of my mother's extravagant lifestyle was laid bare. There was the platinum credit card Beatrice used for her exclusive country club membership, fine dining, and endless cosmetic procedures. There was the gold card Giselle used to fund her fake wealthy influencer persona, charging designer shoes, luxury spa weekends, and daily high-end expenses. Giselle had a card with a $50,000 limit that she treated like endless free money. Every single luxury they flaunted to Andre and his prominent family was financed by the very person they had just banned from the wedding. Thomas typed rapidly on his end. I am seeing several large pending authorizations on Giselle's card right now, he noted. It looks like the luxury resort where they are staying for the wedding weekend is trying to place a $15,000 hold for the rehearsal dinner open bar. If I decline this hold, the hotel management will likely approach them during the event to demand an alternative form of payment. Do you want me to let this final charge clear before I lock the account? A slow smile spread across my face. My sister wanted a high society aesthetic. She wanted to impress her new in-laws with endless champagne and top-tier imported liquor. She just did not want me there to drink any of it. Decline it, I said, my voice steady and cold. Decline the hold, cancel the cards, and flag any further attempts to access the master account as unauthorized activity. Lock them out completely. Consider it done, Thomas replied. The cards will read as declined the next time they are swiped. I thanked him and ended the call. I leaned back and watched the dashboard on my computer screen refresh. The status icons next to my mother's and sister's names turned from a vibrant active green to a stark deactivated red. With a 5-minute phone call, I had completely dismantled the financial foundation of their entire existence. They were currently sitting in the lavish lobby of a 5-star resort, surrounded by Andre's wealthy relatives bragging about a lifestyle they could no longer afford. They had zero cash of their own, they had zero credit of their own, and in a few short hours they were going to start swiping those useless pieces of plastic. But I was not quite finished. Cutting off their money was only the first phase of my retaliation. My mother possessed a vintage diamond necklace, a family heirloom that belonged to my late grandmother. Before she passed away, my grandmother explicitly promised that necklace to me. However, my mother had forcefully taken it and locked it in her possession, claiming I was not elegant enough to wear it. I knew she had brought it to the resort to wear for the rehearsal dinner tonight. Now that I was officially uninvited from the wedding and financially severed from the family, I was going to retrieve what rightfully belonged to me. I closed my laptop and stood up. I was staying at the exact same 5-star luxury resort where they were hosting the rehearsal dinner. They just did not know I was occupying the penthouse suite. I walked over to the closet and pulled out a sharp, tailored designer blazer. I was not going to hide in my room and quietly disappear like they wanted. I was going to walk right down to that lobby, retrieve my grandmother's necklace, and secure a front-row seat to watch the financial collapse I had just orchestrated. I stepped out of my luxury suite and walked down the quiet, carpeted hallway directly toward the private elevator reserved exclusively for penthouse guests. I checked my reflection in the mirrored doors. My tailored emerald green blazer fit perfectly. It was understated, powerful, and completely devoid of the flashy designer logos my mother and sister obsessively wore. I pressed the button for the lobby. The descent was smooth and silent, giving me exactly 60 seconds to mentally prepare for the chaos I was about to walk into. When the elevator doors parted, the sheer volume of the rehearsal dinner cocktail hour washed over me. The resort had cordoned off the grand atrium for the event. Waiters in crisp white tuxedos glided through the crowd, carrying silver trays loaded with imported caviar and crystal flutes of vintage champagne. A classical string quartet played softly in the far corner. It was a picture of extreme wealth and immaculate illusion that I had entirely financed. I scanned the room and easily spotted Andre's family. The Jacksons exuded a quiet, generational elegance. They stood close together, speaking in low tones, looking effortlessly dignified. In sharp contrast, my mother and sister were holding court near the center ice sculpture, projecting their voices far too loudly and laughing with an artificial brightness that made my skin crawl. Beatrice was already wearing my grandmother's diamond necklace. It sparkled under the massive chandelier, looking entirely out of place against her overly trendy sequined gown. I did not try to blend in or hide. I walked directly into the cordoned area, my heels clicking rhythmically against the marble floor. I was halfway to the ice sculpture when one of the bridesmaids tapped Giselle on the shoulder and pointed in my direction. Giselle turned. The fake radiant smile she had been flashing to her future in-laws instantly vanished. Her face contorted into a mask of absolute fury. She handed her champagne glass to a bridesmaid and began marching toward me, her heels stomping heavily against the floor. Her entourage of 6 bridesmaids trailed closely behind her like a wealthy pastel-colored army. "What the hell are you doing here, Sienna?" she hissed, keeping her voice just low enough to avoid drawing Andre's attention. "I texted you. You are banned. You are explicitly uninvited. I told you I will not let you ruin my aesthetic." I stopped walking and looked at her. She was wearing a white silk cocktail dress that cost more than most people make in 3 months. I paid the invoice for it 4 weeks ago. "Your aesthetic is perfectly safe from me, Giselle," I replied, my voice completely level. "I am not here to attend your rehearsal dinner. I am not here to eat the caviar or drink the champagne. I am here for one specific reason, and then I will gladly leave you to your performance." Her eyes darted nervously around the lobby, terrified that Andre or his parents might walk over and realize she was arguing with the sister she claimed was a jealous, unstable recluse. "You are trespassing on a private event," she snapped, stepping closer and invading my personal space. "This is a high society gathering. Look at you. You look like you just walked out of a miserable board meeting. You do not belong here with real money. Turn around and walk out the front doors right now, before I have security drag you out." I almost laughed. I was standing in the lobby of a resort where I occupied the most expensive room on the property, being threatened by a woman whose credit cards had just been permanently deactivated. "I am not leaving without grandmother's diamond necklace," I said firmly, locking my eyes with hers. "Mom is wearing it right now. We both know grandmother left that necklace to me before she died. Mom stole it from my apartment 3 years ago because she decided I was not glamorous enough to own it. Since I am no longer family, I am collecting my inheritance. Tell her to take it off and hand it over, or I will walk right up to her and take it myself in front of your new husband." Giselle gasped loudly, her face turning pale. "You are insane," she whispered. "You are actually insane. You come here trying to ruin the most important weekend of my life, demanding jewelry like a common thief. I am not the thief in this family, Giselle. I simply want what rightfully belongs to me." By this time, the aggressive body language had caught the attention of the surrounding guests. The bridesmaids were whispering to each other, shooting me disgusted glares. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw Beatrice notice the commotion. She excused herself from Andre's mother and began stalking toward us, her eyes flashing with pure malice, completely unaware that the financial ground beneath her had already collapsed. Beatrice moved through the crowd with the speed of a predator protecting its territory. Before she could reach us, Giselle took matters into her own hands. She needed a spectacle. She needed to show her new in-laws that she was the victim of an unhinged attack. Giselle reached out and snatched a full glass of dark red Pinot Noir from a passing waiter's tray. She did not even hesitate. With a flick of her wrist, she hurled the entire contents of the glass directly at my chest. The dark liquid splashed violently against my tailored emerald blazer, soaking through the silk lapels and staining my crisp white blouse beneath. The crystal glass shattered against the marble floor at my feet. A collective gasp echoed through the lobby. The string quartet abruptly stopped playing. Every single head in the room turned toward us. Andre and his parents, standing just a few yards away, froze in shock. "Oh my God!" Giselle screamed, her hands flying to her mouth in a display of exaggerated horror. "I am so sorry. You startled me. Why are you attacking me? Please, just leave me alone." She was putting on the performance of a lifetime. She staggered backward, pretending to be terrified of my presence. That was the exact moment Beatrice finally reached us. My mother did not ask if I was all right. She did not express shock at the shattered glass or my ruined clothes. Instead, she immediately pivoted to face Andre's prominent parents, slipping into the role of a distressed but protective matriarch. "I am so incredibly sorry you have to witness this," Beatrice announced loudly, ensuring her voice carried across the silent lobby. "Please, everyone, do not be alarmed. This woman is a mentally unstable former employee of ours. We let her go months ago because of her erratic behavior, and now she is trying to extort us on the eve of my daughter's wedding. She has been stalking our family, demanding money she did not earn." The audacity of the lie was almost breathtaking. A mentally unstable former employee. She was standing there wearing the diamond necklace my grandmother intended for my wedding day, using my money to buy the champagne her guests were drinking, and publicly stripping away my identity as her daughter, just to save face. Andre's mother, a highly respected federal judge, took a step forward, her expression laced with deep concern. "Beatrice, should we call hotel security or the police? If this woman is extorting you, she needs to be removed from the premises immediately." "Yes, please call security," Giselle whimpered, leaning against one of her bridesmaids. "She is completely unhinged. She just came up to me demanding my jewelry." I stood perfectly still amidst the chaos. I did not raise my voice. I did not wipe the dripping wine from my blazer. I did not desperately shout that I was actually the sister who paid for the entire event. Raising my voice would only validate their narrative that I was hysterical. I knew that in high-stakes situations, the person who loses their temper loses the room, so I absorbed the shock value. I let the silence stretch, giving them enough rope to hang themselves. I looked at Beatrice. Her eyes were wide with a silent, frantic warning, daring me to expose her. She was betting everything on the assumption that I would be too humiliated by the wine and the public scene to fight back. She thought I would run away in tears to hide my ruined clothes. I looked at Giselle, who was peeking out from behind her bridesmaid, a smug, victorious smirk playing on her lips. She thought she had won. She thought the spilled wine was the ultimate checkmate. But they had made a catastrophic miscalculation. They assumed I was still the quiet, obedient girl who desperately craved their approval. They did not realize they were dealing with an executive who destroyed predatory corporations for a living. By calling me a former employee and accusing me of extortion in front of a federal judge, Beatrice had just crossed the line from toxic family dynamics into actionable defamation. And by destroying my designer clothing in the lobby of a luxury resort, Giselle had just given me the perfect excuse to involve the hotel management. I did not need to scream to ruin them. I just needed to pay the bill. I slowly reached into the inside pocket of my completely ruined blazer. The thick fabric was wet and sticky with red wine, but my leather card holder was perfectly intact. I pulled it out and turned my attention away from my mother and sister. I looked directly at the panicked front desk manager, who was sprinting toward us, clutching his security radio ready to intervene. The manager arrived breathless, his hand gripping the radio attached to his belt. He looked from the shattered glass on the marble floor to my wine-soaked blazer, and finally to Beatrice, who was already opening her mouth to demand my immediate removal. Before she could utter a single syllable, I extended my hand, offering the heavy titanium card to the manager. I apologize for the disruption, I said, projecting calm authority. My sister had an accident with her beverage. Add the cleanup cost and a generous tip for the staff to my room folio. I am in the penthouse suite. The manager glanced down at the card in my hand. The moment his eyes registered the distinctive black titanium of an American Express Centurion card, his entire posture transformed. The aggressive stance of a hotel employee preparing to eject a trespasser vanished instantly, replaced by the polished, deferential bow of luxury hospitality. A Centurion card is not something you apply for. It is an invite-only symbol of immense wealth, requiring hundreds of thousands of dollars in annual spending just to maintain. In the luxury resort industry, holding that card makes you absolute royalty. Right away, Miss, the manager replied, his tone laced with sudden, profound respect. He did not reach for his radio. He did not call security. He took the card with both hands as if handling a rare artifact. I will handle the cleanup immediately. Shall I also arrange for our in-house dry cleaning service to attempt to salvage your blazer? Do not bother, I replied smoothly, ignoring the dumbfounded expressions on the faces of my mother and sister. It is a custom piece, and it is completely ruined. I will have my assistant order a replacement. Simply process the incidental charges for the lobby. Beatrice stood completely frozen, her mouth slightly ajar. She had expected the manager to tackle me or drag me out by my arms. She had banked on my public humiliation. Instead, she was watching a senior hospitality executive treat me like the most important person in the building. Giselle looked equally confused, her fake tears drying up instantly. They lived in a world of maxed-out credit limits and hidden debts, so they possessed no concept of what a black card actually represented. But Andre did. I shifted my gaze past my mother and locked eyes with my future brother-in-law. Andre was a partner-track corporate lawyer at a prestigious firm. He spent his days analyzing mergers, acquisitions, and the hidden financial liabilities of wealthy clients. His entire career was built on spotting discrepancies. As he stared at the heavy titanium rectangle in the manager's hand, I could literally see the gears turning in his sharp legal mind. Andre knew exactly what a Centurion card was. He knew that the annual fee alone cost more than most people made in a year. He knew banks only extended that line of credit to ultra-high net worth individuals. And most importantly, he knew that mentally unstable, unemployed former employees did not carry limitless black cards and stay in five-star penthouse suites. The narrative Beatrice and Giselle had painstakingly fed him over the last 2 years was fracturing right in front of his eyes. If I was the destitute, jealous sister they claimed I was, how was I commanding this level of financial respect? If they were the ones with generational wealth, why was Beatrice currently sweating through her sequined gown, while I remained completely unbothered by a ruined designer blazer? Andre took a slow step forward, separating himself slightly from his parents. His eyes moved from the card to the manager, and finally rested on me. He was no longer looking at me with the pity or disgust he had shown just moments ago. He was looking at me like a witness on the stand who had just introduced a piece of evidence that contradicted the entire case. The manager swiped the card on his terminal, the machine emitting a soft beep. He handed it back with a receipt. "Everything is taken care of, miss. We apologize for the inconvenience." "Thank you," I said, slipping the card back into my pocket. I turned to Beatrice, who clutched her diamond necklace as if she feared I might rip it from her throat. The power dynamic in the room had violently shifted. I had not yelled. I had not thrown anything. I had simply flexed a financial muscle they could not comprehend, but one that Andre recognized perfectly. "I will be leaving now," I announced, making sure my voice carried directly to Andre. "But mother, we will be discussing the return of grandmother's necklace very soon. Enjoy the rest of the evening." I turned on my heel and walked away, leaving a heavy, suffocating silence in my wake. I did not look back, but I could feel the collective weight of their stares burning into my ruined blazer. The moment the elevator doors closed behind me, the illusion my family meticulously built began to crack. Down in the lobby, the string quartet hesitantly resumed playing, but the damage was irreversible. Andre did not return to his parents. He did not comfort my mother. Instead, his jaw tightened, and he turned directly to the woman he was supposed to marry in less than 24 hours. Andre grasped Giselle by the elbow, his grip firm and unyielding. "Excuse us," he said to the bridesmaids, his voice carrying an edge of absolute authority. He guided a visibly trembling Giselle away from the ice sculpture, steering her into a secluded corridor near the resort executive offices. "What was that?" Giselle Andre demanded, dropping his hand from her arm. His tone was not angry, but it possessed the precise, calculating cadence he used when cross-examining a hostile witness. "You told me your sister was a destitute recluse. You told me she was unemployed, mentally unstable, and prone to begging your mother for rent money." Giselle pressed her back against the expensive silk wallpaper, her eyes darting around nervously. "She is Andre. I swear she is. She came here to extort us and steal my jewelry." Andre crossed his arms. "Extort you?" "She just casually absorbed a luxury property damage fee on a Centurion card. You do not get an American Express Black Card by being unemployed. You get it by spending $500,000 a year. So I am going to ask you one more time. Who exactly is your sister?" Panic flared in Giselle's eyes. The carefully rehearsed script she and Beatrice used to trap Andre was failing. Driven into a corner, she doubled down, unleashing a chaotic string of desperate lies. "She stole it!" Giselle blurted out, her voice pitching higher. "That is the only explanation. She must have stolen it from one of the wealthy executives she used to work for before she was fired. Or maybe she is involved in something illegal. She lives in New York, Andre. People run credit card scams all the time. She probably forged her name on it to look rich. That is why the manager believed her." Andre stared at her, his brow furrowing in disbelief. He was a corporate attorney who specialized in financial liability. He knew exactly how the banking system operated. "Giselle," he said slowly, treating her like a child failing to grasp basic logic. "You cannot forge a titanium Centurion card. You cannot steal one and use it at a 5-star resort without the system immediately flagging it." The manager addressed her by name. He confirmed she is staying in the penthouse suite. "You cannot book a $10,000 a night penthouse with a stolen credit card without providing matching identification." Giselle realized her logic was crumbling. Her breath hitched and she immediately pivoted to her favorite defensive tactic. She started crying. Not the fake polite tears from the lobby, but loud dramatic sobs meant to guilt him into submission. "I cannot believe you are doing this to me right now," she cried, covering her face with her trembling hands. "It is our rehearsal dinner. We are getting married tomorrow and you are taking the side of a criminal who just tried to ruin my weekend. Why are you interrogating me? Why do you care so much about her money? I am your fiancé. You are supposed to protect me." Andre did not reach out to comfort her. He stood perfectly still, quietly watching the tears stream down her face, ruining her immaculate bridal makeup. For the last 2 years, he accepted her glamorous lifestyle without question. He assumed her family possessed generational wealth. He trusted the invoices Beatrice handed him, believing they were customary wedding traditions. But witnessing the raw financial power I commanded, juxtaposed with Giselle's frantic, baseless accusations, triggered an undeniable alarm in his mind. "Okay," Andre finally said, keeping his voice carefully neutral. "I am not interrogating you. I just want to ensure we are not dealing with a legitimate threat. Let us just go back to the party." Giselle sniffled, nodding eagerly, believing she successfully manipulated him. She linked her arm through his, eager to return to the champagne and safety. But as Andre walked her back into the grand atrium, his mind was already miles away. He did not believe a single word she had just said. The deep seed of doubt was firmly planted, and Andre quietly resolved to uncover the exact financial reality of the woman he was about to marry. I did not stick around to watch the rest of the rehearsal dinner dissolve into quiet paranoia. The air inside the lobby felt entirely too stifling. I walked past the grand glass doors and stepped out into the cool evening breeze of the valet portico. I was standing under the massive crystal chandelier illuminating the circular driveway, waiting for the attendant to bring around a complimentary house car to take me into town for a quiet dinner. The heavy glass doors swung open violently behind me. I turned to see Beatrice marching out her heels, striking the pavement with aggressive intent. She had left the party specifically to hunt me down. She stopped just inches from my face. Her chest heaved with every breath, and the diamonds of my grandmother's necklace caught the bright light of the valet stand. She pointed a trembling, manicured finger directly at my chest. "You vindictive, miserable little girl!" Beatrice hissed, her voice dripping with pure venom. "You could not stand seeing your sister happy for just one night, could you? You had to come down here and humiliate us in front of Andre's prominent family. You had to show off some fake credit card to make yourself look important and steal the spotlight from the bride." I looked at her outstretched finger and then up to her furious eyes. "The only person who humiliated you tonight was your golden child when she threw wine on a guest in a luxury lobby. And that credit card was very real, mother. As real as the financial bills you are about to face." Beatrice sneered, completely ignoring my warning about her impending financial reality. "I am not playing your twisted mind games, Sienna. You are not getting this necklace. It belongs to Giselle now. She is the bride. You are nothing but a pathetic embarrassment to this family. I want you off this property immediately. If you do not pack your bags and leave this resort right now, I am calling the police. I will have you formally trespassed and dragged out of here in handcuffs for harassing a private event." I let her finish her frantic, unhinged threat. I signaled the valet captain, who gave me a highly respectful nod indicating my car was pulling up. Then I turned my full attention back to my mother. "You cannot trespass me, mother," I said, keeping my tone deadly calm and entirely level. "You do not understand how the real world works. You only understand the artificial luxury bubble I paid for. You are a guest staying in a standard room that I booked for you. I am occupying the penthouse suite. But more importantly, my private equity firm manages the massive retirement portfolio for the chief executive officer of this entire resort group. We hold their corporate accounts. I am a highly valued business partner to this establishment. If you call the police and try to have me removed, the hotel management will legally evict you and your entire wedding party for creating a hostile environment for their corporate client." Beatrice's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Her mind visibly struggled to process the sheer scale of the power dynamic. She was so used to seeing me as the quiet, obedient bank account that she could not comprehend the corporate predator I actually was. She took a step back, her hands instinctively flying up to clutch the diamond necklace around her throat, as if I was going to rip it off her neck right there on the pavement. "Keep the necklace for tonight," I told her, my voice dropping to a low, commanding whisper. "Enjoy the feeling of those heavy diamonds on your skin. Because by tomorrow afternoon, you are going to be begging me to take it back. You are going to need every single asset you can possibly liquidate just to survive the financial fallout you both created." The valet brought a sleek black town car to a stop right beside us. The driver immediately jumped out and opened the rear passenger door for me. I stepped inside, settling into the plush leather seat. I rolled down the tinted window just enough to deliver my final words for the evening. "Go back inside, mother. Drink the expensive champagne. Smile for the cameras and pretend you belong here. Tomorrow is going to be the most expensive day of your entire life." The window glided up silently, completely shutting out her stunned, pale face. The car pulled away from the portico, leaving Beatrice standing totally alone in the driveway. The tension had reached a boiling point, and the night was far from over. I knew Andre was questioning everything inside that lobby. I knew the hotel credit hold was about to bounce. The trap was set, the exits were blocked, and all I had to do now was wait for the midnight alarm to sound. As the town car glided away from the valet stand, I leaned forward and tapped the glass partition. I asked the driver to circle the property and drop me off at the discreet private entrance reserved for executive staff. I had no intention of going to dinner just yet. I wanted a front row seat to the financial demolition I had arranged. I took the service elevator up to the mezzanine level, a wraparound interior balcony that offered a perfect, unobstructed view of the grand atrium below. I stood in the shadows, leaning against the polished mahogany railing, and pulled out my phone. I dialed the direct line to the hotel manager I had just spoken with in the lobby. He answered immediately. I told him I was ready to settle the incidental charges for my ruined blazer, and casually suggested he might want to process the pre-authorization for the rehearsal dinner open bar right now. I reminded him that my family had a habit of exceeding limits. The manager, fiercely protective of the resort's bottom line and aware of my corporate influence, agreed without hesitation. He promised to send the banquet director to their table immediately. I slipped my phone into my pocket and looked down at the party. The string quartet played softly. Waiters circulated with trays of champagne. Giselle was back to pretending everything was perfect, laughing a little too loudly while clinging to Andre's arm. Beatrice marched back into the room, her face pale but her posture rigid, trying desperately to project the image of a wealthy matriarch unbothered by our recent argument. 10 minutes later, the music did not stop, but the flow of alcohol certainly did. I watched from above as the banquet director approached the main bar. He spoke quietly to the head bartender. The bartender nodded, reached underneath, and placed a discreet brass sign on the polished marble top. It read, "Bar closed." A few of Andre's prominent relatives walked up to order drinks only to be politely turned away. Murmurs of confusion began to ripple through the crowd. A high society rehearsal dinner never ran out of alcohol at 9 o'clock in the evening. Giselle noticed the commotion and flagged down the banquet director. Even from the elevated mezzanine, I could see the sheer panic flash across her face as the director handed her a black leather billfold. The $15,000 credit hold for the open bar had been formally declined by the bank. Giselle immediately handed the billfold to Beatrice. This was the moment of truth. This was the exact moment the illusion shattered. Beatrice, wearing my grandmother's diamonds, confidently reached into her designer clutch and pulled out her heavy platinum credit card. She handed it to the director with a dismissive wave. The director pulled a mobile payment terminal from his jacket pocket and inserted the card. The machine flashed a bright red light. Declined. Beatrice frowned deeply. She snatched the card back, muttering something defensive about a bank security freeze, and pulled out her gold card. She swiped it herself. Read again. Declined. The murmurs in the crowded lobby grew louder. Andre's parents, standing only a few feet away, exchanged an uncomfortable glance. Beatrice was visibly sweating now. Her manicured hands shook violently as she dug through her purse, pulling out a third card. It was an airline rewards card she rarely used. She shoved it into the machine, her knuckles turning white from the strain. The machine beeped sharply. Declined. 3 different credit cards. 3 rejections. The accounts were frozen, completely unlinked from my master portfolio. The infinite well of money had finally run dry in front of everyone. Giselle covered her mouth, her eyes wide with terror. She looked at Andre, who was standing perfectly still, watching the disaster unfold. He did not look surprised. He looked like a man whose worst suspicions had just been confirmed. Beatrice stammered awkwardly, attempting to laugh off the humiliation. She loudly blamed the payment system, claiming their terminals must be malfunctioning. But the banquet director remained entirely professional and completely unyielding. He quietly informed her that unless an alternative form of payment was provided immediately, he would have to ask the guests to vacate the atrium. The humiliation was undeniable. The wealthy matriarch could not afford the drinks her guests consumed. Andre stepped forward. He did not say a single comforting word to Giselle or Beatrice. He simply reached into his tailored suit jacket, pulled out his own wallet, and handed the director his personal corporate card. The machine beeped green instantly. The massive bill was successfully settled, but the relational damage was permanently done. Andre paid the tab, turned his back on his future bride without taking a backward glance, and walked straight out of the lobby. I stayed on the mezzanine level just long enough to watch the elevator doors slide shut behind Andre. The lobby below had descended into hushed, awkward whispers. My mother was frantically trying to console a weeping Giselle, while Andre's parents quietly excused themselves and retreated to their rooms. The high society illusion was completely shattered. I turned away from the railing, took the service elevator up to my penthouse suite, and poured myself a glass of sparkling water. The silence of the room was a stark contrast to the chaos I had just orchestrated. I changed into silk pajamas, slipped between the high thread count sheets, and turned off the bedside lamp. But I did not sleep. I lay there in the dark, watching the digital clock on the nightstand cycle through the hours. I was waiting for the inevitable midnight panic. When you build a trap to catch a financial parasite, you do not just cut off their current supply, you own the ground they walk on. What my mother and sister did not know, what nobody in that lobby knew, was the true extent of my control over tomorrow's wedding. 2 weeks ago, my private equity firm finalized a quiet, highly lucrative acquisition. We purchased the parent management company that owned several historic luxury properties along the East Coast. One of those crown jewel properties was the historic Newport estate where Giselle was supposed to walk down the aisle. I did not just pay the deposit for the venue. I literally owned the building, the grounds, the catering contracts, and the floral arrangements. I was the absolute unquestioned authority over every single aspect of the event. At exactly 2 o'clock in the morning, the private cell phone resting on my nightstand began to vibrate. The screen illuminated the dark room, displaying a restricted number. I answered on the first ring. It was Mr. Caldwell, the senior estate manager for the Newport property. I had explicitly instructed him to contact me directly regarding any unusual activity concerning the Jackson wedding account. He apologized profusely for waking me, his voice tight with professional anxiety. I assured him I was awake and asked for his report. Mr. Caldwell explained that he had just received a frantic, tearful phone call from the bride. Giselle was in a state of absolute hysteria. Desperate to overcompensate for the humiliating disaster at the rehearsal dinner, she decided she needed to completely overwhelm Andre and his wealthy parents with an unparalleled display of opulence the next morning. She demanded a massive last-minute upgrade to the ceremony decor. She wanted an additional $50,000 worth of rare, imported white orchids draped over the main entrance, a secondary floral archway for the altar, and an extended premium caviar station for the cocktail hour. She told Mr. Caldwell that money was absolutely no object. She ordered him to charge the additions immediately to the card on file, insisting the floral design team begin working through the night to ensure the estate looked like a royal palace by sunrise. Giselle was functioning under the desperate, frantic delusion that she could somehow buy back Andre's respect with an overwhelming display of wealth. She convinced herself that the embarrassing card declines at the hotel lobby were just a temporary security glitch caused by traveling, a minor inconvenience that certainly would not affect the prestigious master account tied to the luxury wedding venue. Mr. Caldwell paused on the other end of the line, taking a careful breath. He informed me that per standard estate policy for high-value emergency additions, he had attempted to run the $50,000 pre-authorization on the gold credit card Giselle had kept on file for incidentals. The payment gateway immediately rejected the transaction with a hard decline code indicating the account was frozen. Recognizing the family name and fully aware of my firm's recent acquisition of the estate management company, Mr. Caldwell had wisely decided to cross-reference the master billing details before confronting the bride. He discovered exactly what I already knew. The primary corporate account responsible for funding the entire $250,000 wedding was completely dead. He called me because he needed executive authorization on how to proceed with a panicked bride demanding services she could no longer afford. He asked if he should wake the floral team or inform Giselle that her request was denied. I sat up in bed, the cool night air brushing against my shoulders. The trap had officially snapped shut. Giselle had just given me the perfect legal justification to execute the final, devastating phase of my financial retaliation. I kept the phone pressed to my ear and swung my legs over the side of the bed. "Mr. Caldwell," I said, keeping my voice entirely devoid of emotion. "I am glad you called me before speaking to the bride. Do not wake the floral team. There will be no white orchids. There will be no premium caviar. In fact, I need you to pull up the master billing contract for the Jackson wedding right now." I heard the frantic clicking of a keyboard on his end. "I have it open, miss," he replied, his tone shifting from anxious to highly alert. He could sense the impending corporate execution. The primary deposit of $250,000 was paid via a wire transfer from my wealth management firm, I explained. However, The individual who authorized that specific allocation, Giselle, was not a legally authorized signatory on that corporate account. She misrepresented her financial authority. Therefore, I am officially instructing you as the Chief Executive Officer of the parent company to initiate a full and immediate chargeback of those funds, citing fraudulent use of an unauthorized corporate account. The line went completely silent for a few seconds. Mr. Caldwell was a seasoned hospitality veteran, but clawing back $250,000 8 hours before a high society wedding was unprecedented. Miss, if I process a chargeback of that magnitude, the system will automatically flag the entire event as completely unfunded. The estate policy requires events of this scale to be fully settled before the first guest arrives. I am fully aware of the policy, Mr. Caldwell, I replied smoothly. That is exactly why I want you to enforce it. I want you to trigger the emergency breach of contract clause. Draft a formal notice of financial default. Send it directly to the email address Giselle provided on the primary contract. Inform her that the initial deposit has been flagged for corporate fraud and successfully reversed. Tell her that in order for the gates of the estate to open tomorrow, the wedding party must pay the entire $250,000 balance in full. I stood up and walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window of the penthouse looking out over the dark, quiet resort grounds. And Mr. Caldwell, make sure you specify that, because their credit accounts have already been locked for suspicious activity, the venue will only accept a certified bank wire transfer. Understood, Mr. Caldwell said, his voice dropping to a serious professional whisper. And what is their deadline to produce these funds? 10 o'clock in the morning, I stated. Not 1 minute later. If the funds are not fully secured and verified in the estate holding account by 10 in the morning, you will instruct the private security team to lock the main wrought iron gates. You will not allow any vendors, any caterers, or any guests onto the property. If the bride or her mother attempt to bypass the security perimeter, you have my full executive authorization to contact the local authorities and have them immediately removed for trespassing. I could hear him typing the notes rapidly into the system. It will be done exactly as you instructed, he confirmed. The notice of default will be sent to the bride immediately. Shall I call her to confirm receipt? Absolutely not, I instructed. Let her sleep. Let her wake up on her wedding day believing she is a high society bride. She will see the email when she checks her phone in the morning. I want her to experience the exact same sudden, suffocating panic she tried to inflict on me when she banned me from the venue. Do not answer any calls from her or my mother. Direct all of their desperate inquiries to the automated billing department. Yes, Miss, Mr. Caldwell replied, maintaining his flawless professionalism. I will secure the perimeter at dawn. Have a good night. He ended the call, and I placed my phone back on the nightstand. The final piece of the trap was locked firmly into place. My sister wanted a lavish wedding surrounded by wealthy, prominent people, free from the embarrassment of the corporate drone who actually funded her entire life. Now she was going to get exactly what she asked for. She was going to face Andre, his family, and 200 high society guests with absolutely nothing but a massive bill she could never afford to pay. But the financial devastation I just unleashed on the venue was only half of the nightmare awaiting Giselle. While I was stripping away the estate, yet another completely catastrophic financial crisis was quietly brewing in a different room at the resort, and it was about to destroy her relationship before she even reached the altar. I would later learn exactly what transpired in the groom's suite on the far side of the resort while I dismantled the venue. Andre had not returned to the penthouse he shared with Giselle. After paying the embarrassing $15,000 bar tab in the lobby, he demanded a separate room. He needed space to think. He was a prestigious corporate lawyer whose career depended on assessing risk and identifying liabilities. His legal mind was spinning with the contradictions he had witnessed. My mother claimed I was destitute, yet the manager treated me like an executive. Giselle claimed we possessed generational wealth, yet her cards bounced. None of it made sense, and Andre hated variables he could not control. He was sitting in the dark at the small desk massaging his temples when his phone vibrated against the wood surface. The digital clock read 2:15 in the morning. It was an automated push notification. Not a text message from his panicked bride, but a high-priority alert from his Experian credit monitoring application. Andre kept strict watch over his financial health. A pristine credit score was essential for a man operating in elite circles. He unlocked his phone screen, expecting to see a routine alert about the large bar tab he had just settled. Instead, the notification banner flashed a bright red warning. It reported a severe, unexpected drop in his overall credit score. Andre opened the application, his brow furrowing in confusion. His score had plummeted by nearly 70 points. He navigated immediately to the recent accounts section, his eyes scanning the data with practiced speed. There, sitting at the top of his financial profile, was a brand new $30,000 unsecured personal loan. The lender was not a reputable Tier 1 banking institution. It was a secondary high-interest, predatory lending company that preyed on desperate borrowers. The interest rate attached to the loan was an astronomical 24%. Andre stopped breathing. He had not authorized any new lines of credit. He certainly had not applied for a predatory loan. He tapped into the detailed view, his heart beginning to pound against his ribs. The loan had been finalized and disbursed 3 weeks ago. The funds had been wired directly to the flagship Vera Wang bridal boutique in Manhattan. The realization hit him like a physical blow. 3 weeks ago was the exact same time Giselle had gleefully showed him her custom designer wedding dress. She had twirled around his apartment, crying tears of joy and claiming her mother had paid for the extravagant gown in full, using their supposed generational family wealth. It was another massive, unforgivable lie. Beatrice had not paid for the dress. I had not paid for the dress because I drew the line at funding clothing that cost more than a vehicle. Because she was completely cut off from my master accounts for that specific purchase, Giselle had panicked. Desperate to maintain her high society aesthetic and secure the designer gown of her dreams, she had taken matters into her own hands. She had used Andre's personal information, his social security number, his income statements, and his pristine financial history to apply for the loan. And then she had electronically forged his signature on the binding legal documents. Andre stared at the glowing screen of his phone, the chilling reality washing over him. The conflict was no longer a trivial family dispute between two sisters. It was no longer about a spilled glass of wine or an embarrassing credit card decline at a hotel bar. This was a severe, prosecutable felony. Identity theft, wire fraud, forgery, committed by the woman he was supposed to marry in less than 8 hours. His legal training took over, suppressing his initial shock and replacing it with cold, calculating fury. He knew exactly what this meant for his future. If he married her tomorrow, he would become legally entangled with a woman comfortable committing federal financial crimes against him. The State Bar Association would strip his license to practice law if he was ever found complicit in such fraudulent activities. She had not just lied about her family's wealth. She had actively victimized him to fund her own vanity. Andre did not throw his phone or shout at the walls. He took a screenshot of the fraudulent loan details and emailed it to his secure work server to meticulously document the evidence. He stood up, his jaw locked tight. He was not going to wait for the morning to address this betrayal. He put his suit jacket back on, grabbed his room key, and walked out into the dimly lit hallway of the resort. He was heading straight for the bridal suite. The wedding was already dead. He just needed to deliver the corpse. Andre did not knock gently on the door of the bridal suite at 3 o'clock in the morning. He pounded his fist against the heavy wood, the sound echoing loudly down the quiet resort corridor. It took nearly a minute before the door clicked open. Giselle stood there in her silk robe, her eyes red and puffy from crying over the declined credit cards at the rehearsal dinner. She tried to force a relieved smile, assuming Andre had come to comfort her and assure her the financial embarrassments were just a minor bump in the road. She reached out to pull him inside. Andre did not return her embrace. He stepped past her, his face a mask of absolute stone, and walked directly into the center of the lavish suite. He placed his iPad on the glass coffee table. Giselle followed him, her fake smile faltering immediately. "What is wrong?" she asked, her voice trembling. Andre tapped the screen, illuminating the high-interest predatory loan agreement bearing his forged electronic signature. He did not yell. His voice was terrifyingly calm. I need you to explain this, Giselle. I need you to tell me exactly how my social security number, my financial history, and my signature ended up on a $30,000 loan agreement dispersed to a bridal boutique 3 weeks ago. Giselle stared at the glowing screen. All the color drained from her face. The meticulously crafted aesthetic she had built for 2 years instantly evaporated. There was no denying the evidence. The digital paper trail was absolute. She collapsed onto the velvet sofa and immediately burst into loud, hysterical tears. It was her standard defense mechanism, the exact same tactic she had used in the lobby earlier. She covered her face, sobbing wildly, hoping to trigger his protective instincts. But Andre just stood there looking down at her with complete detachment. I am so sorry, Giselle wailed, her words tumbling out in a frantic rush. I did not want to do it. Mom made me do it. She told me we had to keep up appearances. Sienna cut us off from buying the dress, and Mom said your family would look down on me if I did not have a custom gown. She promised we would pay it back after the wedding with the cash gifts from the guests. It is not my fault, Andre. Please believe me. Mom forced me. The loud sobbing woke Beatrice, who had been sleeping in the adjoining bedroom. My mother emerged, tightening her robe, looking annoyed at the disruption. When she saw the iPad and heard Giselle throwing her under the bus, Beatrice did not show an ounce of remorse. Instead, she straightened her posture and shifted seamlessly into her favorite role as the manipulative matriarch. She looked at Andre, completely unfazed by the revelation of felony fraud. Oh, please stop being so dramatic, Andre, Beatrice scoffed, crossing her arms defensively. Yes, we took out a small loan. Weddings are incredibly expensive, and we needed to ensure everything was perfect for your high society friends. You should be thanking us for handling the stress of it. You make a substantial income as a lawyer. $30,000 is nothing to you. A real man, a man who actually loves his fiancée, would be proud to take on a little debt to give his bride the dress of her dreams. You are embarrassing yourself by acting like a victim over a piece of clothing. You are about to be her husband. Her debts are your debts anyway. It is time you step up and act like a provider. Andre stared at my mother, completely disgusted by the sheer entitlement and the blatant gaslighting. She was openly admitting to identity theft and trying to twist it into a test of his masculinity. She actually believed she could manipulate a corporate attorney into accepting criminal fraud as a standard wedding tradition. Andre looked back down at Giselle, who was still weeping on the sofa, waiting for him to surrender. He finally saw them for exactly what they were. They were not wealthy socialites. They were financial parasites. You forged my signature to steal from me, Andre said, his voice cold and final. You committed a federal crime because you cared more about a dress than you cared about me. He picked up his iPad from the coffee table. He did not demand an apology. He did not argue with Beatrice about the definition of being a provider. There was no point in negotiating with people entirely devoid of a moral compass. He simply turned around and walked toward the door. The wedding was only hours away, but he already knew exactly what he had to do next. Andre gripped the brass handle of the hotel room door, his knuckles white from the tension. Every instinct in his body screamed at him to walk out, pack his bags, and leave the resort immediately. But Andre was not just an angry fiancé. He was a corporate litigator who specialized in high-stakes financial disputes. He knew confronting a fraudster without a legal strategy was dangerous. If he blew up the relationship right now, Giselle and Beatrice would immediately go into damage control mode. They would delete emails, shred documents, and potentially attempt to access his other accounts out of pure desperation. To successfully protect his assets and ensure Giselle faced the full legal consequences of forging a predatory loan, he needed to secure undeniable, ironclad proof of their entire financial history. He needed to trap them in their own web of lies, in front of witnesses who could not be manipulated. He took a deep breath, forcing his raging pulse to slow down, and slowly released his grip on the door handle. He turned back to face the room. Giselle was still curled up on the velvet sofa, watching him with wide, terrified eyes, mascara running down her cheeks. Beatrice stood nearby, her chin raised, looking incredibly smug, assuming her speech about masculinity had successfully shamed him into compliance. Andre let out a heavy sigh, expertly dropping the cold prosecutorial mask he had worn just moments before. He rubbed his temples, projecting the image of a stressed but yielding groom. "Okay," Andre said, keeping his voice deliberately soft. "Okay, let us just calm down. I am upset because you hid this from me, Giselle. But shouting about it at 3 in the morning is not going to solve anything. We have a wedding to get through tomorrow." Giselle let out a massive, shuddering gasp of relief. She leaped off the sofa, rushing forward to wrap her arms around his waist. "Oh, thank you, Andre," she cried into his chest. "Thank you. I promise I will make it up to you." Beatrice gave a self-satisfied nod. "I'm glad you came to your senses, Andre," she stated smoothly. "Now let Giselle get her beauty sleep. We have a big day ahead of us." Andre gently detached Giselle from his torso. "Get some rest," he murmured, ignoring the urge to recoil from her touch. "We will fix this tomorrow after the ceremony. We will sit down and figure out the finances together." Giselle nodded eagerly, completely missing the double meaning behind his words. She truly believed she had dodged a bullet. Andre picked up his iPad, offered a tight, forced smile to his future mother-in-law, and walked out of the bridal suite. The moment the heavy door clicked shut behind him, the illusion of forgiveness vanished. His face hardened. He walked down the corridor, returned to his separate room, and immediately opened his laptop. He spent the next hour locking down every single one of his bank accounts, placing a hard freeze on his credit profile with all 3 major bureaus, and drafting a preliminary legal outline for civil and criminal litigation. But he was missing a massive piece of the puzzle. He needed to know exactly how deep the financial rot went. He needed to know the true origin of the money they had been spending for the last 2 years. There was only one person who possessed that information. The woman they had publicly humiliated in the lobby. The woman who casually paid a damage fee with a limitless titanium card. Sienna. Andre picked up his phone. He did not have my personal number, but he quickly found my corporate contact information through a simple search of my private equity firm's directory. At 4:30 in the morning, my phone buzzed with a secure encrypted text message. I reached over in the dark and opened it. It read, "Sienna, this is Andre Jackson. I know they have been lying to me. I found a forged loan in my name. I am not marrying your sister, but I need the full financial picture before I pull the plug. Meet me at the estate gardens at 6 in the morning. Come alone." I stared at the glowing text message, a slow, predatory smile spreading across my face. Andre was much smarter than I had anticipated. He was not going to let them quietly sweep this under the rug. He was building a case. I typed my reply, hitting send, as the first light of dawn began to creep over the horizon. I wrote, "I will be there. Bring your iPad." I placed the phone back down on the cold marble surface of the nightstand. The final piece of our retaliation was now officially and perfectly aligned for the morning ahead. The sun rose over the Rhode Island coast, casting a brilliant golden light across the manicured lawns of the Newport estate. By 9 o'clock in the morning, the heavy wrought iron gates were supposed to be wide open, welcoming a fleet of luxury town cars. Over 200 high society guests were beginning to arrive for what was billed as the wedding event of the season. They wore designer gowns and tailored tuxedos, expecting an unparalleled display of wealth. But instead of being escorted to the champagne reception, they were held at the security perimeter. Inside the sprawling bridal suite on the second floor of the estate, Giselle was entirely oblivious to the growing crowd of confused guests outside. She sat in a plush velvet chair in front of a gilded vanity mirror, sipping sparkling water while a celebrity makeup artist carefully applied her blush. Giselle looked radiant, completely convinced that she had successfully manipulated Andre into forgiving her financial fraud. She had purposefully ignored the unread emails on her phone, assuming any notifications from the venue were just routine confirmations. She was living in a delusional bubble of impending victory. Her mother, however, was rapidly spiraling into a state of absolute terror. Beatrice paced the length of the suite, her silk robe rustling frantically. She had spent the last 2 hours trying to reach her bank to figure out why all of her credit cards were frozen, only to be transferred to the fraud department and put on an indefinite hold. She knew they were entirely out of money, but she clung to the desperate hope that the venue would simply bill them after the event. That fragile hope shattered the moment the heavy double doors of the suite swung open. The head wedding planner, a woman known for her flawless execution of elite events, marched into the room. She did not carry the customary bridal bouquet or a tray of morning mimosas. She carried a leather-bound portfolio and a face completely drained of color. She asked the makeup artist to leave the room immediately. Giselle spun around in her chair, annoyed by the interruption. "What is going on?" she demanded, carefully patting her hair. "We are supposed to be doing photography in 20 minutes. The planner opened her portfolio and pulled out a single sheet of paper. "There will be no photography," she stated, her voice tight with professional anxiety. "I just received a formal notice of financial default directly from the estate management group. The $250,000 wire transfer that secured this venue has been successfully charged back by the corporate account holder. The funds are gone. The estate management has declared a breach of contract." Beatrice stopped pacing, the color drained entirely from her face. "That is impossible," she stammered, her hands trembling violently. "We paid that deposit months ago. There must be a banking error." The planner handed the notice to Beatrice. "It is not an error. The venue ownership requires a replacement wire transfer of $250,000 immediately. If the funds are not verified in their holding account by 10 o'clock, they will not unlock the main gates. Your guests are already lining up on the street, and security is actively turning them away." Giselle let out a piercing shriek. She snatched the paper from her mother, her eyes frantically scanning the harsh legal terminology. "Do something, Mom!" she screamed, her perfect bridal composure instantly evaporating. "Call the bank. Call Andre. We cannot cancel the wedding right now. Everyone is already here." Beatrice grabbed her phone with shaking hands. She could not call Andre. Asking the groom for $250,000 on the morning of the wedding, especially after he discovered the forged loan last night, would be absolute suicide. "She could not call me because she knew I was the one pulling the strings." Desperate Beatrice resorted to the absolute lowest tier of financial survival. She frantically opened her web browser and searched for emergency payday loans. She rapidly typed in her personal information, requesting massive sums of unsecured cash. But the American financial system is unforgiving. Every single application returned an immediate glaring red rejection screen. Her credit score was practically non-existent after I removed my guarantee. The massive debt-to-income ratio from her lavish lifestyle automatically flagged her as a severe liability. There was no secret account to tap into. There were no hidden reserves. She could not believe this was happening. Beatrice dropped her phone onto the carpeted floor, realizing the devastating truth. The money was completely gone, the venue was locked down, and the reality of their poverty was about to be broadcast to 200 of the absolute most influential people in the entire city. Beatrice could not accept the absolute terrifying finality of her financial situation. Panicking, she grabbed the wedding planner by the arm, unleashing a desperate barrage of lies. She claimed the bank had mistakenly flagged the massive wire transfer as fraud because of the early morning hour. She begged the planner to open the gates, warning her that keeping 200 of the most prominent citizens in the city waiting on the street would cause a massive public relations disaster for the luxury venue. Against her better judgment, the planner agreed to let the guests onto the grounds and seat them at the ceremony lawn, strictly to avoid a chaotic scene at the property entrance. But the planner explicitly warned Beatrice that if the funds were not verified, the exact moment the clock struck 10, the ceremony would be immediately halted. Giselle remained entirely ignorant of this desperate negotiation. As far as she was concerned, her perfect day was proceeding exactly as she had demanded. Down on the immaculate emerald lawn overlooking the ocean, the guests took their seats. The elite crowd murmured with anticipation, their designer outfits catching the bright morning sunlight. Andre stood at the altar, looking incredibly sharp in his tailored tuxedo, though his expression was entirely unreadable. He had his own agenda, but he was playing his part perfectly, waiting for the exact right moment to execute his exit strategy. At 10 o'clock sharp, the classical string quartet positioned near the front row began to play the elegant processional march. The rich, sweeping melody filled the salty ocean air. Giselle emerged from the grand double doors of the estate flanked by her pastel bridesmaids. She paused at the top of the stone staircase, proudly ensuring every single eye was locked onto her custom designer gown. She looked down the long white aisle, a triumphant smile plastered across her face. She took her first step down the stairs, preparing to walk into her new life of fabricated wealth and status. She made it exactly 3 steps before the music violently stopped playing altogether. It was not a gradual fade. The cellist dragged his bow harshly across the strings, producing a jarring, unpleasant screech that echoed across the quiet lawn. The sudden silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. Giselle froze on the staircase, her foot hovering awkwardly in midair. She looked frantically toward the musicians, violently motioning for them to continue playing, but they were already placing their instruments back into their velvet-lined cases. Before the confused whispers of the wealthy guests could escalate, the heavy wooden doors of the estate swung open again. 4 imposing private security guards dressed in crisp black suits with earpieces marched out in perfect unison. They did not walk down the discreet side paths, they marched directly down the center of the pristine white aisle. The guards bypassed the seated guests, walked straight up to the wooden altar, and formed a solid, impenetrable human wall directly in front of the lavish floral arch. The crowd gasped audibly. Several prominent guests shifted uncomfortably in their expensive seats, exchanging shocked glances. Andre did not move a single muscle. He simply stood to the side, his hands clasped firmly behind his back, watching the trap spring completely shut. The head wedding organizer boldly stepped out from the side of the wooden altar. She did not look apologetic in the slightest. She looked furious. She walked past the security guards and stepped up to the microphone that was originally set up for the officiant. She tapped the microphone twice. The sharp sound cut rapidly through the rising panic of the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen," the organizer announced, her voice booming clearly through the professional sound system, "I ask for your immediate attention. On behalf of the estate management group, I regret to inform you that this ceremony will not be proceeding today." A collective wave of pure, unadulterated shock rippled through the 200 guests. Giselle gripped the stone railing of the staircase, her knuckles turning bone white. She opened her mouth to scream at the organizer, but her voice completely failed her. The organizer did not sugarcoat the harsh reality to protect their fragile feelings. She read directly from the legal notice in her leather portfolio. This event has been officially suspended due to a severe breach of contract. The primary deposit securing this venue was charged back this morning due to fraudulent use of an unauthorized corporate account. The bride and her family were given a strict deadline to provide a replacement wire transfer to cover the $250,000 balance. They have completely failed to produce the required funds to settle this massive debt. The silence that followed was absolute. The elite crowd people who valued financial integrity above all else turned their collective gaze away from the altar and stared directly at Giselle and Beatrice. The grand illusion was officially dead. The bride was not a wealthy heiress. She was a fraud who could not even afford the very grass she was standing on right now. Before Giselle could formulate a single word of defense to the staring crowd, the massive mahogany doors at the top of the stone staircase swung open once again. The heavy, resounding thud of the solid wood hitting the exterior stone walls shattered the tense silence. Every single head on the lawn snapped upward. I stepped out of the shadows of the estate interior and into the bright morning sunlight. I was not wearing a pastel bridesmaid dress. I was not hiding in the background to preserve my sister's aesthetic. I was wearing a custom-tailored emerald green suit with razor-sharp lapels and a crisp white silk blouse. The color was rich, commanding, and projected absolute corporate authority. I looked down at the sprawling ceremony lawn, meeting the shocked gazes of 200 high society guests. I began my descent down the stone staircase. The sharp click of my heels echoed loudly in the complete quiet of the courtyard. I did not rush. I walked with the measured, deliberate pace of someone who owned the ground she walked on. The guests parted slightly as I reached the bottom of the stairs and began my procession down the center of the pristine white aisle, right past the imposing wall of security guards who respectfully stepped aside to let me through. Beatrice, sitting in the front row of the family section, violently rose to her feet. The shock of the financial default had momentarily paralyzed her, but seeing me walk down the aisle in a display of absolute power ignited a frantic, desperate rage. She pointed a shaking finger at me, her face flushed red with anger and humiliation. "What is she doing here?" Beatrice screamed, completely abandoning her refined, high society persona. She turned wildly toward the 4 security guards flanking the altar. "Grab her! I want her removed right now. She is a mentally unstable trespasser trying to ruin my daughter's wedding. Get her off this property immediately before I call the police." The security guards did not flinch. They did not move toward me. They remained planted in their defensive formation, their eyes scanning the crowd, completely ignoring my mother's hysterical orders. Beatrice looked around, frantically confused as to why the hired muscle was disobeying a direct command from the supposed matriarch of the event. She took a step toward me, but the lead guard raised a large gloved hand, forcing her to step back. I reached the front of the aisle and stopped just a few feet away from Giselle. My sister was trembling so violently that the delicate lace of her custom Vera Wang dress shook around her. Her face was a mask of pure terror. She looked from me to the unpaid floral arch, the devastating realization finally breaking through her delusion. The head wedding organizer, who had been standing silently near the microphone, stepped forward. She looked directly at Beatrice with an expression of cold, professional disdain. Then she raised the microphone back to her lips. Her voice boomed across the lawn, echoing off the stone walls of the historic estate. "Ladies and gentlemen," the organizer announced smoothly, her tone leaving absolutely no room for argument or misinterpretation. "The bride's mother does not possess the authority to issue security commands on this property. Please direct your attention to the front of the aisle. I would like to formally welcome the Chief Executive Officer of the Property Management Group and the legal owner of this entire estate, Sienna." A massive collective gasp erupted from the 200 seated guests. The sound was like a sudden gust of wind sweeping across the lawn. Wealthy socialites, corporate titans, and prominent judges exchanged stunned looks. The narrative they had been fed for 2 years was instantly obliterated. The woman Beatrice had just called a mentally unstable trespasser was actually the billionaire executive holding the deed to the most exclusive venue in the state. I turned my gaze away from the shocked crowd and looked directly at Andre. He was standing near the altar, looking incredibly sharp in his tuxedo. When our eyes met, he did not look surprised. He offered a slow, deliberate nod of acknowledgement. He knew exactly what was happening, and he was watching the execution of his fraudulent bride with quiet, calculating satisfaction. Beatrice collapsed backward into her front row seat, as if all the oxygen had been sucked from her lungs. Her mouth opened and closed silently, like a dying fish. Giselle let out a low, pathetic whimper, taking a step backward away from me. The perfect upper-class aesthetic she had so desperately tried to cultivate was completely destroyed. Instead, there was only the cold, undeniable reality of their financial fraud laid bare before the exact people they had desperately wanted to impress today. The sheer magnitude of the revelation hung heavily in the air, stifling the ocean breeze. For a moment, nobody moved. The 200 prominent guests were frozen, processing the abrupt shift in reality. Then the silence was shattered by the frantic rustling of silk. Beatrice, stripped of her proud, matriarchal facade, scrambled out of her front row seat. She practically sprinted up the white aisle toward me, her heels sinking ungracefully into the immaculate lawn. She stopped mere inches from my face, her eyes wide with a manic, terrifying desperation. "Sienna," Beatrice hissed, her voice trembling with an aggressive, panicked whisper meant only for me. "Stop this right now. You are embarrassing the family. You are ruining your sister's life in front of everyone who matters. Tell the organizer there was a mistake. Authorize the payment immediately, or I swear to God I will never speak to you again." I looked down at the woman who had spent my entire life making me feel inadequate. I looked at the diamond necklace around her throat, the necklace she stole from me shimmering against her skin. The threat of her never speaking to me again was not a punishment. It was the ultimate reward I had been waiting for. I did not whisper my response. I did not lean in to protect her reputation. I took a deliberate step back, ensuring the microphone caught the projection of my voice. "There is no mistake, Mother," I said loudly, my voice carrying clearly to every single row of seated guests. "The payment was not a mistake. It was a chargeback for corporate fraud. You cannot use my master accounts to fund a wedding you explicitly banned me from attending." Beatrice flinched as if I had struck her across the face. She glanced frantically over her shoulder at the elite crowd, seeing the judgment instantly forming in their eyes. She turned back to me, her voice rising in pitch, abandoning all pretense of a whisper. "You are lying," she screamed, pointing a trembling finger at my chest. "We do not need your money. We never needed your money. You are just jealous of Giselle. You have always been jealous of her because she is beautiful and she found a wealthy man. You are a bitter, lonely corporate drone trying to steal her spotlight." The audacity to repeat the exact same lies she had spewed on the phone just 24 hours ago while standing on the property I owned was almost pathological. She was clinging to the golden child illusion with the desperate grip of a drowning woman. It was time to finally tear it down completely. "I am not trying to steal her spotlight," I replied, my tone icy and resolute. "I am simply reclaiming my financial assets." I looked past Beatrice, addressing the silent crowd, and Andre, who was watching intently from the altar. "For the past 5 years, I have quietly funded every single aspect of my mother and sister's luxurious lifestyle. I paid the mortgage on the house they live in. I paid the balances on the platinum credit cards they use for their designer clothes and their exclusive country club memberships. I funded the vacations. I funded the cars. I funded the illusion." Giselle let out another loud sob, covering her face with her hands. "You told Andre and his family that you possess generational wealth," I continued, my voice echoing off the stone walls. "You told everyone here today that this lavish wedding was a traditional gift from a wealthy matriarch. But the truth is, every single deposit for this venue, the caterer, the flowers, and the open bar last night, came directly from my private equity firm. You lived off my paycheck while mocking me behind closed doors for working a real job. You called me a spinster. You called me an embarrassment. And then you had the absolute audacity to kick me out of an event I was paying for because I did not fit your high society aesthetic." The gasps from the audience were no longer collective. They were distinct, audible expressions of disgust. Several prominent guests, including a local senator, whispered furiously to their spouses, the Jacksons. Andre's parents sat completely rigid, their faces masks of pure outrage. The depth of the deception was unfathomable. "You have nothing, Mother," I stated, delivering the final blow. "You own absolutely nothing. Your credit is frozen, your accounts are dead. And as of 10 o'clock this morning, you are officially in default. You do not belong here." Beatrice stood completely paralyzed. The manic energy had completely drained from her body. Her arms dropped limply to her sides. She could not formulate a lie large enough to cover the massive crater I had just blown into her reality. She was exposed completely and utterly as a manipulative parasite masquerading as elite society. The ultimate humiliation was complete, but the consequences of their actions were just beginning to unfold. Beatrice remained frozen, her mouth slightly ajar, stripped of every defense she had ever relied upon. I did not give her a chance to recover. I turned my attention away from her defeated posture and reached inside the tailored breast pocket of my emerald blazer. I withdrew a slim black leather folder. It was not a thick, dramatic binder, but it contained enough financial reality to permanently dismantle their fabricated high society identities. I bypassed my mother entirely, leaving her standing awkwardly in the middle of the aisle, and walked directly toward the front row on the right side of the lawn. Andre's parents sat there radiating a quiet, dignified shock. His father, a retired federal judge, and his mother, a highly respected corporate board member, had spent the entire weekend being subjected to my mother's condescending remarks about wealth and status. They had watched Giselle spill wine on me. They had listened to Beatrice call me a mentally unstable former employee. I stopped directly in front of them. "I am deeply sorry for the disruption today," I said, keeping my voice calm, respectful, and entirely professional. "You are a family built on integrity and hard work. You deserved honesty from the moment my sister entered your son's life. Instead, you were sold a carefully constructed illusion. I extended the black leather folder toward Andre's father. I believe in complete transparency, especially when it involves legal and financial ties. I think you should see exactly who you were about to welcome into your family. Andre's father did not hesitate. He reached out and took the folder, his expression grave. He flipped it open, resting it on his lap so his wife could see. Inside was a meticulously organized stack of certified bank statements, wire transfer receipts, and asset management summaries spanning the last 5 years. I had highlighted the most damning transactions. There were the mortgage payments for the house Beatrice claimed was a family estate. There were the massive monthly payoffs for the platinum and gold credit cards. There was the receipt for the custom Vera Wang dress deposit eventually declined and pushed onto Andre. And sitting right on top was the undeniable proof that my private equity firm had funded every single cent of the $250,000 wedding they were currently sitting at. The silence from the front row was deafening. Andre's father traced a finger over the certified bank seals, his seasoned legal mind quickly, verifying the authenticity of the documents. He looked up from the papers, his eyes shifting from the undeniable proof of my wealth to the crumbling facade of the woman standing near the altar. His face hardened into a mask of absolute disgust. He slowly closed the folder and handed it to his wife, who looked at Beatrice with a mixture of pity and profound contempt. "They played us?" Andre's mother stated quietly, her voice carrying an edge of cold fury. "This entire family is a financial mirage." Hearing those words spoken by the prominent matriarch she so desperately wanted to impress was the final devastating blow for Giselle. Her facade did not just crack, it shattered into a million irreparable pieces. The reality that her new in-laws now held the physical receipts of her poverty and manipulation was simply too much for her fragile ego to process. Giselle let out a piercing guttural sob, her knees buckled beneath her. She collapsed directly onto the pristine emerald lawn. The heavy layers of her custom designer silk and imported lace crumpled beneath her, instantly absorbing the damp soil and morning dew. She did not care about the dress anymore. She knelt in the dirt, burying her face in her hands, crying hysterically. It was not the elegant, polite crying she had utilized in the hotel lobby to manipulate Andre. It was the loud, ugly sobbing of a cornered fraudster who had just lost absolutely everything. Her flawless makeup ran down her cheeks in dark streaks. The perfect high society aesthetic she had ruthlessly guarded, the aesthetic she had banned me from the wedding to protect, was entirely destroyed. She had built her entire identity on a foundation of lies, and now the entire world was watching it burn to the ground. She looked pathetic, a woman drowning in the consequences of her own extraordinary greed. The 200 wealthy guests watched her break down in stunned silence, their cell phones subtly emerging to capture the spectacular collapse. I had finally cut the puppet strings, freeing myself from their endless manipulation and their toxic financial abuse. I stood perfectly still, watching my sister weep in the dirt, feeling absolutely no remorse. The financial receipts had exposed the truth, setting the stage perfectly for the groom to deliver his own devastating verdict. Andre did not rush. He adjusted his tailored tuxedo jacket with the calm, methodical precision of a litigator preparing to deliver a closing argument. He stepped down from the elevated wooden altar, his polished shoes crunching softly against the gravel path, before stepping onto the immaculate lawn. He walked straight down the aisle. He did not stop when he reached his bride. He walked right past Giselle, who was still kneeling in the dirt, sobbing hysterically and ruining her custom designer dress. He did not offer her a hand. He did not offer her a single word of comfort. He treated her as if she were completely invisible. Andre stopped directly in front of Beatrice. My mother was still standing near the front row, looking entirely shell-shocked, her eyes darting between me and the wealthy guests, who now knew her true financial reality. When Andre stopped in front of her, a fleeting spark of desperate hope ignited in her eyes. She actually believed in her profound delusion that the groom had come to rescue them. She reached out to touch his arm, opening her mouth to weave another manipulative lie, perhaps to blame me for everything. "Do not touch me," Andre commanded. His voice was not loud, but it possessed a sharp, cutting authority that made Beatrice instantly pull her hand back as if she had touched a hot stove. "You told me last night that a real man should be proud to take on debt to provide for his bride. You told me that $30,000 was a small price to pay to maintain your fabricated high society aesthetic." Beatrice swallowed hard, her throat bobbing nervously. "Andre, please," she whispered, glancing frantically at the crowd. "We can fix this quietly. We can go inside and talk." "There will be no talking," Andre replied, his tone absolute zero. "And there is absolutely no fixing this. I am a corporate attorney. My entire career is built on identifying liabilities and mitigating risk. You and your daughter are the greatest financial and legal liabilities I have ever encountered. You are not just broke, you are common criminals." Andre turned his back on Beatrice and faced the 200 seated guests. He looked directly at his parents, who nodded in silent support. "Ladies and gentlemen," Andre announced, his voice projecting clearly across the courtyard without the need for a microphone. "I apologize for bringing you all out here today under false pretenses. As you have just heard, the wedding is officially cancelled. But it is not cancelled simply because this family lacks the funds to pay for the venue. It is cancelled because I absolutely refuse to legally bind myself to a woman who committed federal fraud against me." Another wave of shocked murmurs rippled through the elite crowd. Andre reached inside his tailored suit jacket and pulled out a thick manila envelope. He turned around and walked back to where Giselle was kneeling in the ruined grass. He stood over her, looking down with an expression of pure, unadulterated contempt. Giselle looked up at him, her face stained with tears and ruined makeup. "Andre, please," she begged, her voice cracking pitifully. "I love you. I only did it because I wanted to be perfect for you. I wanted to fit in with your family." "You forged my signature," Andre stated coldly, holding the envelope up so the entire front row could see it clearly. "You stole my social security number, you accessed my financial records, and you fraudulently secured a $30,000 predatory loan under my name to pay for that dress you are wearing right now. You destroyed my credit score because you cared more about an aesthetic than you cared about the man you were supposed to marry." Giselle gasped, covering her mouth with her trembling hands. She thought he had agreed to fix it. She thought her tears last night had saved her. She never anticipated that a strategic lawyer would simply gather his evidence and wait for the most devastating public forum to execute his judgment. "This envelope contains copies of the forged loan documents," Andre explained, his voice echoing with absolute finality. "It also contains a formal civil lawsuit for financial damages and a copy of the police report I filed at dawn this morning for identity theft and wire fraud. You are not getting a husband today, Giselle. You are getting a criminal record." Andre dropped the heavy manila envelope. It landed with a soft thud right in the dirt, stopping just inches from her soiled designer dress. Giselle stared down at the legal documents, her body shaking uncontrollably as the absolute reality of her impending criminal charges finally registered. The ultimate legal smackdown had been delivered flawlessly. The illusion was officially dead. Andre did not wait for Giselle to pick up the envelope. He did not wait for her to formulate another pathetic excuse or offer another tearful apology. He simply turned on his heel and began walking back down the long white aisle. His posture was perfectly straight, his stride measured and deliberate. He looked like a man who had just excised a massive tumor from his life. He walked past the rows of stunned guests, never once looking back at the woman he had almost married, leaving her to choke on the reality of her impending criminal charges. The moment Andre reached the back row of the seating arrangement, his father stood up. It was not a hesitant movement. It was sharp, decisive, and commanded absolute respect. Instantly, Andre's mother stood beside her husband. Then his aunts, uncles, cousins, and close family friends rose from their wooden chairs. The entire right side of the aisle stood up in absolute, flawless unison. They did not shout insults at Beatrice or Giselle. They did not need to. Their silent solidarity was far more devastating than any screaming match could ever be. They radiated a quiet, untouchable dignity as they filed out of their rows and began following Andre toward the heavy wrought iron gates of the estate. The Jackson family exodus was the catalyst the rest of the elite crowd needed. High society operates on a strict code of self-preservation. The prominent guests, the federal judges, the corporate titans, and the local politicians had just witnessed a bride being served with a police report for felony wire fraud. Associating with exposed fraudsters was social and professional suicide. The murmurs sweeping across the lawn transformed into the loud rustling of expensive fabrics and the scraping of wooden chairs against the grass. The left side of the aisle the guests Beatrice had so desperately tried to impress began to stand up. They did not offer Beatrice sympathetic smiles. They offered her cold, disgusted glares. The local senator who Beatrice had spent weeks bragging about inviting briskly walked past her without a single word of acknowledgement. Couples linked arms and hurried toward the exit, desperate to distance themselves from the catastrophic financial fallout. The rapid exodus sounded like a rushing river of silk and leather, a mass migration away from the toxic epicenter of my mother and sister's collapsed empire. Up at the wooden altar, the illusion was shattering on a much more intimate level. Giselle's bridal party, a carefully curated group of 6 wealthy, influential women she had selected purely for their social standing and high follower counts, were standing frozen behind the floral arch. They had spent the entire morning drinking champagne and complimenting Giselle's fabricated wealth. But the word felony changes relationships very quickly in elite circles. They looked at Giselle sobbing in the dirt, then looked at the heavy manila envelope containing the police report. The realization hit them like physical force. Giselle was not a rich heiress. She was completely broke, entirely cut off from the secret funding source, and she was going to face federal prosecution for identity theft. She was a massive liability. The maid of honor, a woman who had previously sneered at me in the hotel lobby, was the first to break ranks. She awkwardly cleared her throat, avoiding eye contact with the weeping bride. She stepped down from the altar platform, reached under a nearby chair, and grabbed her designer clutch purse. She did not say goodbye. She simply gathered the hem of her pastel silk dress and walked briskly down the side path toward the exit. Once the seal was broken, the rest of the bridesmaids immediately followed suit. It was a chaotic, embarrassing scramble for survival. They abandoned their carefully rehearsed formations. They grabbed their purses, lifted their skirts, and practically jogged away from the altar, leaving Giselle completely abandoned. They did not want their names attached to a federal fraud investigation, and they certainly did not want to be seen comforting a woman who had just been publicly destroyed by her own groom and her billionaire sister. Within 10 minutes, the sprawling, sunlit ceremony lawn was entirely deserted. The 200 wooden chairs sat completely empty. The string quartet had long since packed their instruments and departed. The fleet of luxury town cars outside the gates was rapidly driving away, taking the high society aesthetic with them. Only the 4 imposing security guards remained standing silently near the stone staircase. I stood in the center of the aisle, my emerald suit contrasting sharply with the empty white chairs. At the front of the lawn, beneath the unpaid floral arch, Giselle continued to weep over the manila envelope, while Beatrice stood completely alone, staring blankly at the empty space where her fabricated empire used to be. The silence that settled over the Newport estate was absolute, broken only by the rhythmic crashing of the ocean waves against the distant cliffs. I remained anchored in the center of the white aisle, watching the total devastation of the 2 women who had spent my entire life trying to make me feel small. Giselle was still huddled in the dirt, her fingers clutching the manila envelope containing her impending criminal charges as if it were a lifeline. Beatrice finally blinked, snapping out of her catatonic state. She looked at the empty chairs, the abandoned floral arch, and then she looked at me. The manic fury she displayed earlier was completely gone. In its place was a desperate, manufactured vulnerability. Beatrice had realized that her wealthy groom was gone. Her high society friends had abandoned her, and her credit lines were permanently severed. I was the absolute last resource she had left on earth. She took a hesitant step toward me, her hands clasped tightly together in front of her chest. Tears began to stream down her face, ruining her own expensive makeup. "Sienna," she sobbed, her voice trembling with a practiced fragility. "Please, you have to help us. You are her sister. You are my daughter. We are family, and family blood is thicker than anything else. You cannot just leave us here like this. We will lose the house. Giselle could go to prison. You have the power to fix all of this. Please just pay the venue, hire a lawyer for your sister, and let us start over. We need you." I listened to her desperate pleas, feeling an overwhelming sense of calm wash over me. 5 years ago, those tears would have broken my heart. I would have reached into my accounts and quietly fixed her mess just to earn a fleeting moment of her approval. But today, her tears looked exactly like what they were. They were a transaction. She was attempting to use the concept of family blood as a currency to purchase her salvation. I did not move toward her. I did not offer her a tissue. I crossed my arms over my emerald blazer and looked her dead in the eye. "You do not get to invoke family blood now, Mother," I said, my voice cutting through the salty air like a freshly sharpened blade. "You do not get to claim we are family when you spent the last 2 years actively erasing my existence to impress strangers. Family does not intentionally spill wine on you to humiliate you in public. Family does not call you mentally unstable to protect a lie. Family does not ban you from a wedding you are entirely financing because you do not fit an aesthetic." Beatrice opened her mouth to argue, but I raised my hand, silencing her instantly. "You do not love me, Mother. You love my utility. You love the master account attached to my name. You loved the blind trust that paid your mortgage and funded your country club memberships. For my entire life, you conditioned me to believe my only worth was what I could provide for Giselle. But my self-worth is no longer tied to your validation. I am a highly successful corporate executive. I built my own wealth, and I will no longer allow you to siphon it to fund your delusions." Giselle let out a pathetic wail from the ground, but I did not even glance in her direction. I kept my gaze locked on Beatrice, watching the last slivers of her manipulation shatter against my boundaries. "You made your choices." I continued, delivering the final, unapologetic truth. "You chose to raise a fraud. You chose to encourage her to forge a predatory loan. You chose to bite the hand that fed you until it bled. And now you get to experience the real world without my financial shield. You are going to face the lawsuits, the foreclosure, and the criminal justice system completely on your own." I uncrossed my arms and turned my attention to the 4 private security guards standing at the perimeter of the lawn. I caught the eye of the lead guard and gave him a single definitive nod. He immediately stepped forward, signaling his team to advance toward the altar. I looked back at my mother and sister one last time. "You have exactly 10 minutes to gather whatever personal belongings you brought onto my property," I instructed, my tone shifting to pure corporate authority. "When that 10 minutes expires, my security team will forcefully escort you to the gates. If you resist, or if you ever attempt to set foot on this estate again, I will personally press criminal trespassing charges." I did not wait for their response. I turned my back on my mother and my weeping sister, walking steadily away from the wreckage of their lives, leaving them to face the devastating consequences of their own extraordinary greed. 3 weeks later, the crisp ocean breeze of Newport was replaced by the suffocating reality of the American financial system. There is a common misconception that wealth is a permanent state of being, but in reality, if you are living on credit, your lifestyle is merely rented. When I severed the master accounts and initiated the venue chargeback, I did not just cut off their spending money. I triggered an automated algorithmic avalanche that buried Beatrice and Giselle completely. The financial institutions did exactly what they were programmed to do when high-limit accounts suddenly flatline. Without my massive portfolio acting as a guarantor, their credit scores went into a terrifying freefall. In a matter of days, the numbers plummeted from the high 700s down to the low 400s. In the United States, a credit score in the low 400s is a financial death sentence. It meant their platinum cards were instantly canceled by the issuing banks. It meant the luxury European SUVs they drove were suddenly flagged for immediate repossession. Every single system they relied on to project their high society aesthetic locked them out with absolute ruthless efficiency. They were no longer elite consumers. They were severe liabilities. Beatrice spent hours crying on the phone with bank representatives, begging for emergency extensions. But the algorithms were unforgiving. Then came the civil lawsuits. The Newport estate was secure because my company owned it, but my mother and sister had independently contracted an army of luxury vendors. The premium catering company that had prepared hundreds of expensive meals, the imported caviar suppliers, and the high-end floral designers who sourced those rare white orchids all expected their massive final payments. When the credit cards bounced and the desperate wire transfers failed, these vendors did not offer sympathy. They hired aggressive collection attorneys. Process servers began showing up at my mother's front door at all hours, handing her thick stacks of civil litigation documents, demanding hundreds of thousands of dollars in damages, breach of contract penalties, and unpaid labor. But the civil lawsuits were just a fraction of the nightmare Giselle was facing. Andre Jackson was a man of his word, and as a highly skilled corporate attorney, he knew exactly how to navigate the justice system for maximum impact. He did not drop the charges out of some misplaced, lingering affection. He fully cooperated with the authorities, handing over the forged documents, the IP addresses used to electronically sign the predatory loan, and the digital paper trail connecting Giselle directly to the fraudulent funds. The legal system moved swiftly to address the crime. 2 weeks after the canceled wedding, Giselle was formally indicted for felony identity theft and wire fraud. There was no glamorous high society aesthetic to save her when she was fingerprinted and photographed for a police mugshot. Because she had absolutely no money to hire a high-powered defense attorney, she was forced to rely on an overworked public defender who immediately advised her to take a plea deal to avoid jail time. Giselle, the woman who had banned me from her wedding because I was a corporate drone, was now a convicted felon with a permanent criminal record. The fallout from the felony conviction entirely obliterated her aspiring influencer career. The luxury brands she had desperately courted immediately dropped her from their public relations lists. The elite social circles she had manipulated her way into permanently blacklisted her. People in high society do not associate with convicted fraudsters who steal from their own fiancés. Her followers abandoned her in droves when the news broke, and the sponsors who once paid for her curated posts severed their lucrative contracts, citing strict morality clauses. Giselle's digital empire evaporated overnight, leaving her with absolutely no income, no groom, and a mountain of legal fees she could never hope to pay. They had spent 2 years building a towering castle out of stolen bricks, completely oblivious to the fact that I controlled the foundation. I watched the financial collapse from the quiet comfort of my Manhattan office, reading the detailed updates provided by my legal team. I felt no guilt. I felt no pity. I had given them exactly what they asked for. They wanted to exist without me, and now they were learning exactly what their unassisted existence looked like in a world that demands actual receipts. The ultimate receipt came due on a Tuesday morning, delivered by a process server who did not care about the manicured lawn or the imposing columns of the house Beatrice claimed was a generational family estate. When I severed my financial umbilical cord, I did not just stop paying the monthly mortgage. I actively contacted the primary lender and legally withdrew my name as the corporate guarantor on the property. Without my massive equity shielding the account, the bank immediately recognized the horrific debt-to-income ratio my mother possessed. They did not offer a grace period or a restructured payment plan. They immediately called in the entire balance of the loan. Beatrice was handed a formal notice of default, giving her exactly 30 days to produce $1.2 million or vacate the premises. Naturally, she could not produce a single dime. The foreclosure was swift and utterly merciless. Beatrice attempted to hire a real estate attorney to fight the bank, but attorneys require massive retainers, and Beatrice's credit cards were entirely useless pieces of plastic. The bank secured the eviction order with zero resistance. 60 days after the disastrous wedding that never happened, I drove a rented sedan into my mother's upscale suburban neighborhood. I parked down the street, remaining out of sight, watching the final act of their downfall unfold from behind heavily tinted windows. I was not there to gloat or offer a last-minute reprieve. I was simply there to witness the closure of a toxic chapter that had defined my entire life. Parked in the circular driveway of the beautiful brick home was not a fleet of luxury European SUVs or high-end town cars. There was only a battered yellow commercial moving truck with rusted wheel wells and a dented bumper. Beatrice and Giselle were doing the manual labor themselves. There were no hired movers, because hired movers demand cash up front. There were no wealthy friends from the country club offering to help them pack, because those friends had immediately severed all contact the moment the fraud charges became public knowledge. In elite circles, poverty and criminality are highly contagious diseases, and my family was fully infected. I watched Giselle stumble out the heavy oak front doors. She was not wearing custom silk or designer heels. She wore faded sweatpants and an oversized t-shirt. Her hair was pulled back into a messy knot. The former influencer, a convicted felon serving a suspended sentence and hundreds of hours of community service, was lugging heavy black plastic trash bags down the front stone steps. The profound irony was in the contents of those bags. Beatrice and Giselle had refused to sell their designer shoes, imported leather handbags, and custom jewelry, desperately clinging to the last physical remnants of their fabricated wealth. But because they could not afford premium moving boxes or protective wrapping, they were forced to shove thousands of dollars worth of luxury fashion into cheap garbage bags. They tossed the bags carelessly into the dirty, cavernous back of the rented truck, scratching the expensive leather against the rusted metal floor. Beatrice emerged next, struggling to carry a heavy antique mirror. She looked aged, her posture completely broken. The arrogant, condescending matriarch who had banished me from a hotel lobby was entirely gone. As she rested the mirror against the bumper of the truck, she stopped and looked back at the sprawling house. Even from down the street, I could see the devastating realization wash over her face. They were not victims of a sudden economic downturn or a tragic twist of fate. They were victims of their own vanity and cruelty. They had possessed a life of absolute luxury, fully funded and entirely stress-free. All they had to do to maintain that magnificent lifestyle was show me a fraction of basic human decency. Instead, they chose to humiliate me. They chose to prioritize a fake aesthetic over the daughter who quietly paid for the roof over their heads. They had traded absolute financial security for a fleeting moment of social superiority, and it had cost them everything they held dear. Giselle walked up behind her mother. They stood together in the driveway, two women who had manipulated their way to the top of society, now entirely stripped of their armor. They had no money, no social standing, no grooms, and absolutely no prospects. They were entirely cut off and completely isolated. Beatrice finally turned away from the house. She pulled down the heavy metal door of the rental truck, the loud clatter echoing through the quiet, wealthy neighborhood they no longer belonged to. She climbed into the driver's seat, Giselle sliding in silently beside her. The truck's engine sputtered loudly before roaring to life, emitting a dark cloud of exhaust. I watched the yellow truck slowly pull out of the driveway and turn down the street, heading toward a cramped, low-income apartment in a neighborhood they would have previously mocked. I did not follow them. I put my car in gear and drove in the opposite direction, finally entirely free. That freedom did not just feel like a heavy weight lifted off my shoulders. It felt like a first-class ticket to the other side of the world. 72 hours after I watched that rusted yellow moving truck disappear down the street, I was sitting 30,000 feet above the Atlantic Ocean. The steady, quiet hum of the twin-jet engines was the only sound inside my private, fully enclosed first-class suite. I leaned back against the plush leather seat and stretched my legs out. A flight attendant with a warm, genuine smile knocked gently on the sliding door of my suite, stepping inside to pour a fresh glass of vintage champagne into a real crystal flute. I thanked her, taking a slow sip, as I looked out the large double windows at the endless expanse of white clouds below. I was on my way to the Maldives for a 4-week vacation. I had rented a private overwater villa with a glass floor, a personal plunge pool, and absolutely zero cell service requirements. For the first time in 5 years, I was spending my hard-earned wealth entirely on myself. There were no mortgages to cover for ungrateful relatives. There were no platinum credit card bills to pay for a sister who despised me. Every single dollar in my portfolio belonged to me, and the sheer tranquility of that financial independence was intoxicating. I reached over to the polished wood console and picked up my phone. I connected to the premium in-flight Wi-Fi just to clear out my inbox before I officially went off the grid. As the network connected, a notification popped up from my blocked callers folder. I opened the application. There were 47 new blocked voicemails. They were all from Beatrice. I did not need to listen to a single one of them to know exactly what they contained. I knew the cycle perfectly by now. The first few voicemails were likely furious, demanding that I fix her destroyed credit and blaming me for Giselle's criminal record. The middle voicemails probably shifted into desperate bargaining, promising that they had learned their lesson and begging for just a small cash wire to help them pay the rent on their new cramped apartment. The final voicemails were undoubtedly drenched in heavy manufactured tears, using the weaponized guilt of family loyalty to try and drag me back into their toxic orbit. I looked at the long list of audio files. I did not feel a single ounce of guilt. I did not feel a shred of obligation. A slow, deeply satisfied smile spread across my face. I tapped the edit button in the top right corner of the screen, selected the entire folder, and hit delete. The screen instantly cleared, leaving a perfectly blank, quiet digital space. I locked the phone and tossed it into my carry-on bag. I want to be incredibly clear with anyone listening to this who might be trapped in a similar situation. There is a dangerous, pervasive myth in our society that blood is an unbreakable bond. We are constantly told that we owe our families our unconditional support, our endless forgiveness, and in many cases, our financial resources, simply because we share the same DNA. But genetics do not give anyone a free pass to abuse you. DNA is not a debt collection agency. If you are the scapegoat in your family, if you are the one working tirelessly while being constantly diminished so a golden child can shine, hear me right now. You are not a bank. You are not a human safety net designed to catch people who intentionally jump off cliffs of their own making. When toxic family members realize you have established a firm boundary, they will accuse you of being cruel. They will call you selfish. They will weaponize your success against you, claiming you abandoned them. Let them say it. Let them call you the villain in their fabricated narrative. Protecting your peace, your mental health, and your hard-earned wealth is the most vital responsibility you have to yourself. You cannot save people who are entirely committed to their own destructive behavior, and you absolutely should not set yourself on fire just to keep them warm. Cut the cord. Stop funding the disrespect. The moment you stop pouring your energy and your assets into a bottomless pit of entitlement, you will discover a level of freedom you never knew existed. You will reclaim your life, and you will realize that your success belongs entirely to you. I took another sip of champagne, turned my attention to the high-definition screen in my suite, and prepared for paradise. Thank you so much for listening to my story. If this resonated with you, or if you have ever had to cut off a toxic family member to protect your peace, let me know your experience in the comments below. Do not forget to hit the like button, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to the channel for more stories of absolute revenge and personal empowerment. Stay strong, protect your boundaries, and I will see you in the next one.